Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like him. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
You're listening to the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network, brought to you by Go Wild. Now, the Go Wild app has added some really cool and exciting functionality to their app, and the first one I want to talk about is the Near Me function. And basically what this does, it allows you to engage and connect with people in your area. You guys can talk about gear, you guys can talk about hunting areas, you guys can talk about what's going on in the woods, and it just allows the users to be more of a community and connect easier. The second part is the Gearbox, and what the Gearbox is, it is an opportunity for the users to not only see reviews on products and see what the Go Wild community is using in the field, what products they're using, but it also allows you guys to purchase up to 150,000 products. There's a shopping function on it. So check out the Go Wild app. If you haven't downloaded it to your phone yet, you need to, and you can do that at any app store that is currently available. Go Wild. It's an awesome app. Check them out.
My name is Clay Newcomb, and I'm the host of the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. I'll also be your host into the world of hunting the icon of North American wilderness, the bear. We'll talk about tactics, gear, conservation, but we'll also bring you into some of the wildest country on the planet, chasing bear. In the hunting world, I wouldn't have necessarily been familiar with the term bushcraft. It's not something that we use in hunting. But Rick Spicer is big into bushcraft, wilderness survival, and he teaches those things. And he's also a mountaineer, a hiker, and basically a wilderness adventurer. And that's a lot of his background. He's also a hunter. He's a primitive hunter, primitive archer, naps his own flint, and he's deeply vested inside the outdoor community, has traveled all over the world climbing mountains. Me and Rick talk about mountaineering, some near-death experiences. We talk about his primitive archery, and the main thing we talk about is how to connect these two different groups who both have vested interest in wild places. And we talk about how people from the extreme outdoors and just generally people who are hikers, canoers, mountaineers, kind of how they can transition and how a lot of them want to, but maybe don't know how to transition into hunting and acquiring wild meat from these wild places. Really interesting conversation with a super interesting guy, Rick Spicer. You'll want to check out W Hunting Supply if you have any hound or dog related needs, from Garmin products, leashes and collars, or just expertise on how to use Garmin products. The customer service at DU is excellent. DUHuntingsupply.com. As we're coming into the fall, we're going to be starting to think about fall bear baiting. Northwoods Bear Products, best bear commercial scents on the market. If you're baiting bears, it does not make sense for you to not be using Northwoods. As you've heard me say many times, the product that I use year in and year out is the Northwoods Gold Rush Fryer Additive. It's more powerful than any natural scent that you could have with just natural foods, and it's going to draw bears in. The more bears you have coming in, the more opportunity that you have to be selective on which bear to take, which is a great which is a great advantage inside of hunting bears over bait. Check out Northwoods Bear Products, and check out our buddies at the Western Bear Foundation. These guys are a non-profit hunting conservation organization that are representing bear hunters, bears, and wild places out west. All right. I was trying to think of a new way to do a opening here, Colby.
Yeah. What'd you have on your mind?
I don't know. Well, I think I'm doing it right now. This is a new way to open the podcast.
Considering how to open it.
Rick, do you have any ideas for how we could open this podcast?
Well,
to be just not the same, because we usually say we're at the Bear Hunting Magazine Global Headquarters, so we're not going to say that today.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, that's kind of what I'm used to with because I've listened to several of them, and so it's hard to break away once you've got something that's worked for you for a while.
It has worked for us. It has worked for us. I'll give you that.
But at the same time, sometimes change is worth exploring, I think. So
yes.
I don't know. It's always interesting.
Well, how about we start by saying you're hearing the voice of Rick Spicer.
There you go.
Rick, I've just met you pretty recently. I've known of you for a long time.
Yeah, and likewise, I've known of you for actually years, primarily because of your cousin. But more recently, because obviously of the podcast and the magazine and all that stuff, and being a local guy. And as you've kind of been making a name for yourself and kind of getting out there and all that, you can't help but, especially if you're in that Instagram world and all that stuff, you just start to see these things.
Well, I thought it was cool, Colby. I walked into Pack Rat, and we'll get into Pack Rat. What that is a store in Fayetteville. Yeah. And I recognized Rick behind his mask. So I had a full like
right, the buff. I was wearing,
the buff, like ninja, like all the way up to the eyes almost. Uh-huh. And then and I had on some mask that was like pulling my ears down to where I was like, my kids make fun of me. I have a pretty big head, so when I wear a mask, like a regular mask that was made for somebody else, like it, like my ears must be like way back on my head because it like stretches them down. So anyway, I took my mask off and said, "Hey, Rick, are you Rick?" or something like that. Anyway,
I recognized you too, though. So yeah, I kind of knew who it wasn't a surprise. I should say.
Well, I think that's a good place to start introducing who Rick is. You're let me give a little introduction, and then we can go into the different segments of it. You are a mountaineer, an outdoorsman, a hiker. Your history is pretty deep into like the outdoor world, and part of that being the non-hunting outdoor world of mountaineering and hiking.
Correct.
And you are part owner of a store in Fayetteville, Arkansas called Pack Rat.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. Also, so this is a short intro. You are a hunter.
I am.
And you are into napping flint arrowheads. Yep. Traditional archery. You're into bushcraft, which I want to talk about that because that's a word that I think. I mean, I'm not that familiar with the term bushcraft, and that's kind of ironic because hunters, if other hunters are like me, that's not a term we use to describe, even though we're out in wild places probably doing some of this. But anyway, you're big into that stuff, and I
think as time goes by, all these circles start to overlap more and more, you know what I mean? Which I think ultimately is what we're kind of arrive at a little later in our conversation today. Yeah. And just sort of looking at how all these different things are related. And, I guess ultimately we've no matter which one of those circles you find yourself in, I like to think there's a lot more that overlaps and brings us together than there is that separates us.
Absolutely.
So,
man, what got you into like extreme mountaineering and stuff?
That's a really good question. I've been asked that a few times in my life, and it's weird. I grew up very much a traditional Arkansas upbringing. I'm from East Arkansas in the Delta, and I grew up hunting and fishing over there with my dad. That's what I knew. But probably when I was, 8 or 9 years old, I remember my grandpa gave me this, like, for lack of a better term, a Rambo knife.
Yeah.
And it was a way too big a knife.
Did it have the screw-off compass on the back?
It did not have that, but it had a sheath with all that stuff in it, like pouches on the sheath. So it had the fishing kit in there, and all that stuff. And of course, my parents were like, "Well, are you crazy? What are you giving a knife like that to an 8-year-old kid?" And
because it's cool,
right? And I like to think that he trusted me well enough not to cut my foot off with it or something like that. But I as far back as I can remember, I just knew I wanted to be in the most wild places I could get to. I just wanted
just default inside of you.
And it didn't really matter like what I was doing there. Like I might go to hunt, I might go to fish, I might go to climb a mountain, I might go to just hike or just be there. But I just knew that's what I wanted to do. Yeah. And I really don't even know when that started. But and I guess ultimately I'm grateful for that because it's led me to do a lot of different things in many, many different places in the U.S. and all over the world, really. And so I guess was always just that innate curiosity.
Were there influential figures in your life that helped you learn to value wild? And when I say wild places, because I'm kind of looking back into my life as well.
Sure.
And like my dad, who I talk about like every other podcast, like he valued like getting as far back as we possibly could. Sure. He valued wild places. And I think probably over a lifetime, he built that into me before I was even conscious. Yeah. Did you have that?
I had a similar experience. So, my father was never like a backpacker, so to speak. We didn't ever hike in camp places, but he was always very influential when it came to the outdoors in general. Yeah. And that was just something we did in our family. It was, and my grandfather wasn't a hunter, but he was like a crazy fisherman. Like that was like all he thought about was, he was a carpenter and a fisherman. And so, those were the things. And
did he fish on the Mississippi River over there?
A little bit, but mostly it was those river chutes, Oxbow Lakes and stuff like that. Yeah, that's what I grew up fishing in from a very young age. Places like that. So
yeah. So give me an overview of some of your mountaineering. Like I know you've been down to South America.
Yeah.
Where have you been?
Yeah, I've been lucky to go to quite a few places. So I've done, probably half a dozen trips or so to South America. I've done the biggest mountains I've ever climbed in my life are Peru. And that's the Andes mountain range, and there's mountains over 20,000 feet down there. Wow. And so, I've been fortunate to climb.
Wait a minute. We got to stop here. How tall is Mount Everest?
29,035 feet tall.
29,000. Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's of course in the Himalayas in Asia, and those are the tallest mountain range or tallest mountains.
So
in the
world
Andes,
over there. The biggest mountains are just over 20,000 feet.
Yeah, way up to. So Aconcagua is the tallest mountain in South America, and it's on the border of Argentina and Chile. And I've seen it. I haven't climbed it, but I've driven by it. And but I had done a lot of rock climbing from a young age. I started rock climbing when I was probably 13, 14 years old. I was in an explorer post as a boy. And
in an explorer post?
Yeah, so that's like a branch of scouting.
Gotcha.
So as you develop in scouting, and I don't even honestly know if it's a thing anymore. Okay. But it was kind of a subsidiary, so to speak, of scouting. And there was, of course, a couple dads that were involved and volunteers and things. And there was some kids that I went to school with, and so we just started camping and rappelling and trying to find caves to go into, and we were lucky to have a couple of folks adults that looked after us, and tried to keep us from getting hurt and that sort of thing. And that's where I found rock climbing, and from there it went 100 different directions. Really, it was like,
Yeah.
oh man, I want to do this, I want to do that. I kind of wanted to try everything, but
I didn't mean to derail you. We were in South America.
yeah.
20,000-foot mountains.
Yeah, so I've been there a couple of times. But yeah, I've been to Colombia, I've been to Argentina, I've been to Chile. So I've spent quite a lot of time. I love South America.
And on one of those trips, you go down there. What are your objectives? Like, you're not like going on like a 20-mile loop trail, like taking photos, like, or are you trying to go? Like,
I have actually too, and I actually do that type of thing with my wife. You know, my wife is not a climber. She's, you know, she doesn't hunt. She likes fishing a little bit, but mainly she just likes to be in beautiful places outdoors. And that's an experience that we love to share together. So about half the stuff that I've done, especially as you know, I've gotten older and we've been together, will be trips that are just basically hiking trips or backpacking trips. So we're living out of a backpack for multiple days, and we're just going to enjoy nature and take photographs and that sort of thing. But the other half of the time, you know, it's what I like to call type 2 fun. We're going, or I'm going, and whoever I'm going with, or we're going to be challenged to try to, you know, attempt something that is, it's always a fine line of doing something that's dangerous enough to be sort of interesting and learn how to manage that risk, but not so dangerous that, you know, you're like, man, I may not come home if I do this, right?
So would that be like like a particular mountain, like trying to reach the summit of that mountain? So you would go down to, so you've been down there 6 times. Each time you were like, we are going to climb to the top of this mountain. We're going to climb to the top of this mountain.
It's akin to, you know, you're going to go on a big Western, whatever, elk hunt or what, you know, you don't just go out there blind, right? You do research ahead of time. Well, mountaineering's no different. You know, you do your research, you talk to people, you may get a guidebook or something like that. You learn what equipment you need, and client routes on routes have rating systems. And so, you know, you find a route that's rated that you feel like is appropriate for your level of skill. And then at that point you say, okay, this is our objective. And you go there either most of the time as a team. I mean, a lot of these types of sports, it's a lot more dangerous to do it alone, right?
For sure.
Even though some people do it,
right?
But typically, you know, you're tied into a rope with somebody else, and you know, you're trying to make your way up. And sometimes you get to the top, and sometimes you assess the situation and you say, you know what, it's not worth it. We got to turn around and get down, either because of weather or objective hazards. I mean, I've seen rockfall and avalanches and all kinds of things.
You know, that world is like. It's super different than the hunt. You know, like people might, like somebody that didn't know the outdoors might say, yeah, rock climbing and hunting. Well, they're just the adventure aspects of them.
Right.
Man, I get zero thrill out of being in super dangerous, like physical situations with rock and earth.
Yeah.
I don't mind that much at all dangerous situations with
wild animals.
Yeah. It's to me, it's totally different.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, and I'm not a rock climber and I'm not an adventure mountaineer at all. I've never really done it. But the times that I have experienced what might just be the touch of that, I've been like, get me off of here.
I think a lot of it too comes down to what your experience level is, though, right? Because you obviously have a great deal of experience with wild animals. Like, you know how to handle yourself when you're around bears and, you know, around mountain lions and things like that. But if you don't have that background of like traveling through complicated terrain in the mountains or canyons or stuff like that, you know, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so learning to manage objective hazards, you know, just because you know how to handle one situation doesn't mean you're prepared to handle another, right?
Yeah.
And so it just comes down to how you spend your time and experience level.
Right. And where you've dedicated yourself to the craft of
what you love to do, you know? And it's not, none of it's right or wrong. It's just, how do you love to spend your time? And of course, that's what you're going to focus on.
Okay, give me this answer. How good are you? Just tell me the truth, Rick. No, like just in like mountaineering, like going down, and not good. You know, this isn't a competition. I know it's not, but like how, like what level? Like, you know, somebody could describe probably their competency in hunting if they were being realistic and honest. They could say, you know, I'm a fairly experienced hunter in this style of stuff? Like what's your...
I mean, I would say that my experience level is quite high, but my technical proficiency does not match my level of experience. In other words, I've been on, I've probably climbed 100 mountains in the 20-something years I've been doing it. But I'm also a careful guy, and I look very carefully at what the risks are. And so I tend to, I like to be challenged physically, but when it comes to like managing the risk on the route or whatever the climb is, I tend to pick things that I feel like I can pretty well stay in control of.
Yeah.
And so what that has done is it's given me a lot of experience, but I've avoided a lot of things that were much more technical because I was just like, you know what, I can have just as good a time climbing this route that I feel like is much safer and I can manage than if I go do this harder one, but there's a much higher element of risk involved. So, and I was so for a long time too, I was a rock climbing instructor. I had a certification with the American Mountain Guide Association, what's called a SPI. So I taught rock climbing through that. Okay. And I didn't take people on big mountaineering expeditions. It was more like local rock climbing, right? Teaching them how to go to a cliff and safely, set the routes up and do all that. But I've taught hundreds of people over the years, how to rock climb. And so I guess one of the other things I've always enjoyed about it is, I've taught and brought a lot of friends and acquaintances along on trips like that. And I get a great deal of joy out of, introducing people to these types of things and teaching them how to look after themselves.
Yeah.
For me, that's always been I get a sense of accomplishment out of that because I love seeing somebody afterward that's like, oh man, that was amazing. Like, I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think I'd ever do something like that. Yeah. And it's always, felt really good to share that type of experience with people.
Have you ever almost died on the side of a mountain?
Yes.
What? Give us an example of a story.
So the one that sticks out above all the other ones, just to cut to the chase.
Yeah, tell us that one.
Yeah, so in Peru, it was the first time I went. I guess it was 2001, maybe something like that, and I was with one of my good climbing buddies, guy that I've done, a large percentage of the climbs that I've done with, and we were ascending a mountain. It was a big peak. It was in the specific area we were in was called the Cordillera Blanca, just north of Huaraz, Peru. And we were ascending a mountain, and there wasn't a lot of information about it. And so we didn't have really good up-to-date. We were going off a route description that was like years old, right? Well, what has happened in that mountain range, like many mountain ranges around the world, is these glaciers are receding. Because of climate change and these types of things, right? And so what happens is as the glacier recedes, there's all this exposed rock that for thousands of years had snow on top of it. That exposed rock is now sliding off the side of the mountain. The snow's not there to hold it in place anymore. And so we were unaware of how much of this exposed rock was above us. So we're ascending the side of this mountain, trying to get on the glacier up above us, which is what we were going to try to do, is climb the snow to get to the summit. And as we were going up this kind of really tight trough, we had made it up, several hundred feet, maybe close to 1,000 feet or so. We heard some rock above us break loose. And the next several seconds was terrifying. It was like rocks the size of beer kegs coming down all around us. Oh, wow. And it was, literally grace of God kind of thing that that I'm still here today that kind of tell the story about it. So, we had big backpacks on, and it was one of those things where adrenaline kicked in, and we literally ran down the side of that mountain. I don't know how we did it.
So where did you go? So if rocks are coming from above you, like running downhill.
Yeah. So what we did, it was like, you got to come up with a plan and come up with it fast, right? So what we did was, there wasn't a lot of places to take cover where we were, and we knew we couldn't stay in there. And so we got behind the biggest boulder we could find and there's like debris and stuff kind of going over our heads from this rock fall. And so just real quick, I'm like, okay, we got to get down. We cannot stay here. What we're going to do is we're going to leapfrog this thing. So I'm going to go first, and I'm going to go as far as I can until I get to the next boulder I can hide behind. When I get there, you're going to follow me. And literally, we leapfrogged until we got down. Meanwhile, the weather moves in, and we get in a whiteout, and it starts to snow.
While rock is tumbling
While this
down.
stuff's going down.
Now, how long did this take? I'm envisioning this being like a 10-second ordeal.
The main deal was about that. It was probably 10 seconds or so,
Okay.
but there was a lot of debris and smaller rocks that continued to fall.
And you just realized you were in an unsafe
Yeah, exactly. It's
trough.
like this is a shooting gallery. I mean, you got rocks the size of baseballs, they're still falling down this trough, whizzing by your head. You only take one of those, and of course we had helmets on and stuff, but I don't care what kind of helmet
Really? You had
got
helmets?
on. Oh yeah, I mean you got to have a helmet on doing that type of stuff. And but as the weather moved in, we finally got to a place where we felt like we were safe, where the rocks weren't going to get us anymore, and we crawled under this very large boulder, probably size of a house, and got underneath that thing, and it had a kind of an alcove underneath it, and it was quite wide, but it was only just barely big enough where like we couldn't fully sit up underneath it, right?
Okay.
So you could think of yourself like kind of leaning with on your elbow on the ground.
Yeah.
We spent 3.5 days under that rock.
Oh,
No
wow.
way.
Yeah, it started snowing and kept on snowing and kept on snowing. We couldn't see anything because it was white out.
Wow.
And
Just you and one other guy.
Me and one guy, yeah. And
What time of year was it?
This was June.
So were you concerned about not ever getting to be able? Were you concerned about?
So the good thing is it happened like day 2 of the trip, and
you had plenty of
we
gear.
had provisions for a week, so we had food. We were okay, other than basically just being somewhat.
What was the
stuck.
elevation?
Oh, at that point it was probably 16,000.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, that's
really
where we were at. Yeah, it was pretty high.
Wow.
Um,
Were you, what does that do to you on the inside? Were you scared? I know you were scared in the moment with the rocks, but like after you were
No, at that point, because after everything calmed down, I mean, even the next day, we were still considering like, how can we get back up on the mountain? We're like, well, we're not going that way, right? And so part of the reason, I mean, it's possible we could have gotten down a little bit early, but, we probably had close to a foot of snowfall by the time everything was said and done. And between the conditions, not being able to see, the snowfall and everything, we were like, it's not worth trying to find another safe way up this mountain. We just don't feel like it's, there's plenty of mountains down here. I think we're done with this one. And at that point, we hiked out. And, of course, they weren't expecting us until later. So we didn't have a ride. So we ended up having to, hitchhike to get a ride back into
really?
town. Yeah.
are those outfitted deals in the sense that, like, someone drives you out there?
Yeah, and you'll appreciate this. What many folks do, us included down there, is they hire these guys called arrieros, and they're their mule drivers.
Oh, really?
So so what you do on the way up to your base camp is a mule carries your big pack.
Yes. Yeah. I knew that this conversation was going to end up in the right spot.
So you hire a guy, and he's usually got 2 mules, one mule 1-to-1 ratio, 1 mule for each climber. And your big pack goes in the back of the mule with maybe some extra food or whatever else you want to carry. And you just hike up with a day pack on. And that's nice because it allows you to acclimate and kind of prepare, but save your legs because you're not carrying a 60-pound backpack.
That is exactly the strategy that I use with my mules. Yep. They carry all the gear. So when I get to where I want to go, I'm feeling good.
There
Mules
you go.
are the answer.
That's it.
How much, so if you were at 16,000 feet, how much elevation had you gained?
So the town, it's been a while, honestly, and I don't recall the exact elevation of Water Oz, but it's on up there. I want to say it's at least 12,000 feet, maybe a little bit higher.
Okay.
But you would drive up some of that.
Okay. So. Yeah. Yeah.
Pardon me.
Well, we just got back from Colorado, and we did, a minor hike compared to something like that. But we started at like 10,000 feet and went to almost 13,000. In about a 4-mile stretch.
Absolutely.
It was pretty intense.
Yep.
I mean, especially with that elevation. Elevation's legit.
Yeah, and you're coming from Arkansas, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
we're there for like 3 days.
One thing that people don't realize that haven't spent a lot of time at altitude and things like that is I mean, yeah, it helps to have some fitness, but the fact of the matter is, there's acclimation that has to happen. And the only thing that will allow that to happen is time. Your body has to make more red blood cells so you can absorb that oxygen or the lack of oxygen when you're up there. And I don't care what kind of shape you're in, you can still get altitude sickness, AMS or HAPE or something like that from being in that situation where you go from a low elevation place like Arkansas to a high elevation.
So how many days does it take to, I mean, I realize it would be great if you were there for like a month, but I mean, like 2 days later, are you better?
More the better, but yeah, I mean, obviously, and it depends on how high you're going. And everyone to some degree react slightly differently, but for the average person, I would say a few days is ideal, but there's so many, nowadays people's time is often so limited and they're like, oh, well, I'd love to do that, but I don't have time. I want to do this trip, whatever it is, whether it's a hunting trip, climbing trip, whatever. And so, that's why you hear about these things is because it's a lack of time. People go, they charge up into the mountains and then they end up getting acute mountain sickness or something like that. They got a headache. And the only thing you can do when that happens is go down.
Really?
I mean,
you can't fix it.
There's no drug. You can medicate ahead of time. Although I'm not really a fan of that type of thing. The best thing to do is give yourself time. If it's a mild case, sometimes you can stay put, drink a lot of water, keep yourself hydrated, and you can sort of get over it.
Does that usually happen like above like 10,000 feet?
Yeah, that's a pretty good.
See, I've hunted quite a bit in Montana at 4,000 to 7,000 feet.
Yep.
And people were like, "Oh man, you're gonna have to worry about altitude," and it never has affected me that much.
Right.
But in Colorado last week,
yep,
the town we stayed in was over 10,000 feet.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it wouldn't have crushed me. And I try not to take too much personal note of physical ailments. I try not to give it too much attention. So if I hadn't, I probably would have just been like, man, I don't feel great. But I recognized what was happening, and I actually didn't feel good for about a day.
Yeah.
But then the next day I was pretty much fine.
And it's just because you gave yourself that night. The old adage with climbers, but this can apply to anyone traveling into that terrain, is you climb high and you sleep low. Mm-hmm. And so that's what you want to do. And so even if you're an elk hunter, if you're going up into the mountains, if you want to scout or hunt or whatever, you're going to go check out ridges to glass, whatever it may be. If you can, go back down the mountain and sleep at a lower elevation, and that's going to do a better job of acclimating you, and you're going to feel better. Of course, you've got to travel more, and so you've got to put more work into it.
But if you have a mule,
there you go. That's right.
He does the work.
That's right.
I've had altitude sickness. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's
you got
fun.
Altitude sickness moving to Northwest Arkansas from Dallas.
I still can't. Still can't breathe. No, I went from Texas to Colorado, and it killed me. I didn't miss a morning or evening hunt, but I felt terrible and just slept every moment that I could. And
pretty much guarantee you had acute mountain sickness.
So, and then I'm chugging Pepto and drinking as much water as I could, and I didn't eat for 3 or 4 days. It was just, I didn't want to.
This is not a topic switch, slightly different area of mountaineering.
Yep.
My daughter met Alex Honnold.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
The other day.
Yep.
She
Mr. Free Solo.
It was a random deal, but she met Alex Honnold.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What do you think of that guy?
I think a lot of him. He doesn't. He's very aware that what he's doing is about as dangerous as you could,
For someone who didn't know Alex Honnold, tell him who he is.
Yeah, so Alex Honnold is a sponsored North Face athlete, and he's widely considered to be the best free soloist rock climber that's ever lived. And what that means is he climbs very large rock vertical faces without any type of equipment or protection to keep himself from falling. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't use ropes or anything. Like that. So he's, there's many films out there about him. You can look him up.
What did he climb? Big mountain in Yosemite?
Yeah, he's the first big one he did that got him famous was Half Dome in Yosemite, but he's done El Capitan. He's done all over the world. He's done.
He's just climbing a rock with no ropes.
Yeah, I mean,
certain death if you fall.
Athletically, there's almost no comparison in terms of what he has accomplished,
Really?
But at the same time,
if you saw, here, when my daughter showed, she had a picture with him. It was at the Capitol, actually, in D.C.
Yeah.
And he's like an unimpressive guy.
Oh, he's
He's like 5'10", maybe.
He's a lanky
scrawny
guy. I mean, very fit, obviously.
Yeah.
But he's got on a t-shirt and some shorts walking around. You couldn't pick him out of a crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's not, he's just a average.
So what makes
guy.
him a world-class athlete?
So I would say the number one thing is mentally. He is
Really?
like his mind is he's very different. There's actually they do some kind of medical research on him, and it talks
heard about
that. And he doesn't
how he responds to stress.
Yeah, he doesn't respond to stress, and he doesn't get like endorphin release like the rest of us do when he gets in normal situations that would normally cause stress. So he can keep himself much more under control than the average person when he's in like really dangerous situations.
So does that mean that it's really like on the mountain, a lot of what you would be doing is really not a physical challenge? Like your body could do it, but your mind couldn't.
I mean, there's some of that, but the stuff he's doing, no. It's like only, I've been rock climbing over 20 years. I couldn't hope to even with ropes, even on my best day, I couldn't climb what he's climbing with all the equipment in the world, let alone free solo it without a rope or anything like that. I mean, he's astonishing.
I mean, his finger holds are crazy.
Like, what they're
watching
holding,
what he can grip a hold of, and
it's unreal. But at the same time, he doesn't condone what he does. He doesn't recommend it. He's very aware that it is dangerous, and it's a choice that he's made for himself. It's how he's decided to live his life, and I have a lot of respect for someone that knows themselves well enough to say, you know what, this is who I am, and I'm willing to die for it. And as long as he's not prescribing other people to take that up, then that he has every right to, in my opinion. Yeah. So
no, we've watched many of those films with him, and it seems it's pretty incredible. Yeah, it's fascinating. Really incredible.
Yep.
Well, okay, you've told us your scary story. That was good. Let's talk about what is bushcraft?
Yeah, so I would describe bushcraft in its most basic form as the knowledge of nature and how to interact with it on a personal level. That can mean a lot of different things, though. Some people look at it in terms of survival skills.
That's what I was going to say. I would have thought it would be like...
Most people think about, things like that. Other people have a spin on it a little bit different, maybe like ancestral knowledge, so early people or first peoples type knowledge. So some people focus on a specific skill set, maybe that was more common to a particular Native American group of people or something like that. But these days, most people, I think, just have a general interest in how to kind of know more and need less, I guess you could think of it.
Now that's a key part of it, though, because I'm trying to find the difference in like what somebody would call bushcraft and what we would call going on a 5-day backpacking trip in the mountains. Because you're talking about using less. Bushcraft would be like starting a fire without any kind of ignition source.
Well, and that's where it gets tricky, right? Because some people would consider carrying like a magnesium fire steel and using the spine of your knife. Like that's still bushcraft, because what you did was you went to an eastern red cedar tree, you scraped off a bunch of bark, and you created tinder from that. So there's still an element of knowledge and nature and how to harness that and harvest it and those types of things. But on its more kind of pure level, I guess you could say, you're going to go out and you're going to harvest a mullein stalk, and then you're going to go get a piece of cottonwood for a hearth board, and you're going to create a hand drill.
Mullein stalk, is that a type of tree or
it's
shrub?
A plant. Yeah.
Okay.
Mullein is it's a plant. It has a large basal rosette at the bottom. It's a medicinal plant as well. There's a handful, well, more than a handful, but there's a lot of different plants that can provide you with multiple types of resources. So mullein, like the leaves are real soft and fuzzy. A lot of people think it's lamb's ear, but it actually gets much bigger.
Does it grow here in Arkansas?
Yeah, it grows all over the place here in Arkansas.
Really?
If we went out and walked around, we'd probably find some.
Really?
But the leaves get quite large, and they grow in a round basal rosette. And that, if you dry it, you can make tea with it. It's good for respiratory ailments and things like that. It actually makes great toilet paper if you need it for that use. In fact, it's got a nickname, cowboy toilet paper, because it's soft. It's real soft. But the stalk that it puts up can get quite high, and it has a cone of yellow flowers at the top of it. And when it dries, it becomes very woody. It's soft and it bends too easy when it's green, and it's got too much moisture in it. But as it dries, you can cut that down, and that's your hand drill or your spindle that you would use. And then you need a hearth board, so you could find something like locally, umbrella magnolia would be a good source. Cottonwood is one of my favorite ones, but there's many things you could use. And so you need particular types of material it's less important that you know what species you're looking for, and more important that you understand the characteristics that are needed to make it work properly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know, from having a lot of experience doing that type of thing, I need woods that are low density, because if it's too hard, it's going to require too much pressure and speed in order to bring the temperature up where I need it to get it to ignite, right? So that's one thing. Obviously, you need very low moisture content. If there's a lot of moisture in it, it's going to be fighting you the whole time. And you need low resin content, because if there's a lot of resin in it when you're starting to do it, it's going to kind of gum it up a little bit. So you don't want to use real sappy woods for that type of thing. So, lots of different things can work, but it's just having that knowledge and understanding of, what I need to get it done.
So that would be one example of bushcraft that I think will paint a picture for what we're talking about.
Yep, exactly.
What else like navigation without technology, kind of stuff?
And again, that runs the gamut. Nowadays, most of us are walking around with some kind of phone in our pocket, and we got Onyx on there, right? And that's a great tool. I use it myself. I recommend it. Well, if you want to take
Wait a minute. You're Pack Rat Bushcraft on Instagram. You can't have Onyx. I'm kidding.
Depending on the situation, I'm going to use whatever I can. And it comes down to, like, what are you doing out there? Like, can I navigate by the stars? Yeah, I know I can do some of it. But what am I out here to do? Am I out here to spend my time learning navigation, or am I out here trying to get after an animal, right? Well, I want to spend my time trying to track this animal down and harvest it. So, I could do, navigation by hand,
right.
But I would rather spend my time in other ways. And so a good example, kind of happy medium, and one of the things at Pack Rat that I teach classes on is old school navigation skills with a regular compass and a topographical map. And that to me has a very appropriate place in a sportsman's toolkit, because a compass and a map don't require any power. Your iPhone runs out of batteries unless you got a battery backup or something like that. At that point, it's paperweight, right? Yeah. So, knowing how to use terrain association, read a topographical map, and orient that map with a compass so that you can keep yourself, where you need to be. Those are good examples of what I would definitely classify as bushcraft skills.
How long would it take you to start a fire if we walked outside?
Oh, who knows? I don't know what's out there. I haven't looked around yet. I mean, if I got real lucky, I might be able to do it in a half hour. But,
okay, really?
Yeah, I mean, but that would require some luck.
Could you start a fire? Okay, if you were with me 10 times, and you had a 30-minute window each of those 10 times in different environments here in Arkansas, how many times would you be able to start a fire in 30 minutes?
In 30 minutes? Oh.
I mean, is it like a for sure deal? I mean, it's like...
No, there's so many variables, okay? So time of year.
What has the real dry? I mean, I could probably start a fire out there by clacking two rocks together
and that
right
was
now.
My next thing. What has the weather been like? I mean, has it rained?
So there's nothing that is... I guess what I'm getting at is, like, how did native peoples or backwoodsmen that had none of our modern technology, I mean, did they just go long periods of time without fire because they couldn't start a fire?
Sure, certainly at times.
Or is there a bushcraft way that's just like almost 100%?
There is, but again, even within those primitive skills and bushcraft and things like that, they still had toolkits, right? So if I'm going to spend the time to craft a fire kit, and like, I mean, right now, if you want, I got one in my truck, and it's a good kit. I know, like, if I were to use that, I can have a fire in 10 minutes.
He carries it around in case he wants to start a barbecue or something.
There you go, right? If I have to go out into the woods, there's just so many variables when it comes to harvesting, and it may be.
So with your fire kit, though, you could start a fire
10 minutes.
Predictably.
Yes. If it's a good fire
so
kit,
you could,
right?
So if we were just out here and it was 1600 and we were trying to get from here to Oklahoma.
But the difference is that is a toolkit that I crafted by hand from my knowledge of the environment and how to use it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas instead of, carrying a big lighter in my pocket. And again, I'm not here to knock anyone that does that. In fact, I would encourage you to do that because it's smart. You're prepared, right?
Yeah.
But the other way to look at it and the way that I think about it, because I love sharing these skills and teaching these skills, but I do it less because I think that you're going to need it as a survival skill one day. Like, I hope that never happens to anybody. I hope no one's ever on a hunting trip and it goes south on you.
Bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I can guarantee is that if I have a class and you come and you learn how to do a bow drill or hand drill fire, the first time you're on your own and you make a campfire with that method, you will never enjoy a campfire as much as that one that you made that way, because it enriched your experience and you are more connected to the land around you and your understanding of how to look after yourself.
Yeah.
And that is why I like to do it. And that for me is why I have gone down this path of studying these skills, is because I just enjoy my time out there that much more.
Yeah. Man, I really like that. And I think, it's kind of ironic in a way. Like, if you were to, we have this thing in us, I have this thing in me where I love hunting because it connects me to something like this primitive human experience in a modern time.
Right.
If we could go back and talk to some primitive human hunters at some point and say, hey, there's going to be some hunters in the future that won't know how to start fires the way you do. I mean, like, they would probably be surprised at that. I do not know how to start a fire. I mean, I might bumble around. I mean, I know the concept of starting a fire without a big lighter.
Sure.
But in general, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, a lot of hunters wouldn't be familiar with. And obviously it's a utilitarian issue. It's like we're focusing on different aspects of our mission. Like,
absolutely.
But I think what you're saying is a really valid point, that just the knowledge of these things, like how to start a fire, adds value and adds a depth to the experience. And fire, I've got a book right up there called Catching Fire.
Uh-huh.
Fascinating book. And the whole premise of it is that fire is actually what helped humans, become what we are because of cooked food.
I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And so, like, our connection to fire, and then the fact that Clay Newcomb really doesn't know how or isn't prepared to start a fire without technology. It's kind of hypocritical almost,
Well, again, it just comes down to what you got time for, right? I mean,
first world problem,
right?
I read somewhere where in one of the books I was reading, heck, it was in that book, Catching Fire. They were talking about how these African tribes would carry around basically fire embers.
Yeah,
for days at a time. When they moved, they would carry a stick, a smoldering stick. So they wouldn't have to start a new fire.
Yeah, so like in North America, that's commonly called an Apache match.
Okay.
And so, and there's obviously, depends on where you go. They got a different name for it, right? But the concept's the same, where you remove embers from the fire and you put some punk wood or something that will smolder for long periods of time, and you wrap that in a container, which will often be bark or grasses or something. And then at that point, you can basically just, like, sometimes you can swing it through the air. You just want to keep enough oxygen in that thing so that those embers continue to smolder. But you can walk for miles with something like that.
And then start a new fire when you get there.
And it's much more or much less energy required to do so, right? Because if I have to get my kit out again and expend a bunch of energy and effort into creating an ember, and depending upon what conditions are, that's going to be a lot more just effort exerted, right? And if I've already got these embers, now all I need is tinder, and I put those and I can blow it back into flame.
Yeah.
So again, it's
really
just
cool.
Just back to fundamentals in terms of knowledge of nature and how to use resources around you.
Yeah. Well, something that I think you're known for, especially on your Instagram page, what I see all the time and think is cool. And I have some knowledge of flint napping, but you do a lot of flint napping and making stone projectile points that you're hunting with.
I do. Yeah, it's definitely become a passion of mine.
Where did you learn that?
So I first got interested in it in probably about 1997, and my first year of college, I moved to East Tennessee, and I went to University of Tennessee, and mainly because I was a kid and I just wanted to leave home. You know what I mean? I just wanted to get out and do something different. And for no other reason than because it sounded interesting, I took a class called prehistoric archaeology, and I had
changed your life.
It changed my life.
Yeah.
I had no idea who my professor was going to be, but it turned out it was a guy named Jan Schimmick, and he's like a world-class archaeologist. He goes to France and excavates Neanderthal graves and that type of thing. Fascinating guy. And he was showing these images of, various levels of early man creating these stone tools. And, of course, I knew about arrowheads and stuff at that point, but I never knew how they were made until that point.
Yeah.
And, I got really interested in it, and I started trying to learn on my own. But, of course, back then, there wasn't hardly any internet, let alone, YouTube and stuff where you can go learn how to do this stuff. So I fumbled around for a while and wasn't any good at it. And I tried it, on and off for probably a year or two. And then I kind of put it down for a while. And of course I was in college, you get into whatever you get into, right? And when I decided, so fast forward a little bit of time, I guess first go back, I started learning how to shoot a bow when I was probably about 9 years old. Okay. My dad gave me a compound bow, and I was shooting it instinctively with no release, no sights or anything.
Ted Nugent style.
Totally. And so I hunted that way, quite a bit through high school and stuff, with firearms as well, but that way. And then put the bow down for a while I was in college. Well, near the end of college, I decided I want to start bow hunting again. And when I picked a bow up again is when I started having an interest in I remember when I was, flint napping and that sort of thing. And again, I kind of messed around with it on and off for a while, but about 4 or 5 years ago, partially because, of life changes and things. I've got a couple kids and family and all that.
So you couldn't afford broadheads.
I couldn't be gone as much, right? I couldn't be gone on these expeditions and these things. I needed to find things that I was interested in, but that I could do at home, in proximity. So that's when I really started investing a lot more time in these primitive skills.
Yeah.
And so, I asked myself, I was like, well, are you going to keep fooling around with this, or are you going to commit and learn how to do it? Because that's what it is. It's committing, right? And it's like anything in life. What do you want to be good at? Until you commit, you're never going to reach your potential.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I was like, okay, I either need to put this away or I need to do it. And so at that point, it was just like everyone I could talk to, everything I could read, everything I could watch. And, and I still not, and I don't mean to act like I'm an expert by any means, because I still have, so much to learn. There's really no end to what you can learn when it comes to creating stone tools, and there's all kinds of different technologies and ways that you can go about doing it. But what I have kind of come to, I guess if you want to say specialize in, is creating, simple stone arrowheads for the purpose of bow hunting with them. Some people get into making knife blades, and I've done a little bit of that, but predominantly, I'm trying to recreate functional points that, that I can actually carry out.
Well, you make some beautiful stuff.
Thank you very much.
You really do.
It's just an endless source of fascination for me.
What you just said, I like what you did there as a life strategy. You went into a new season of life. So you were this adventurer, traveling all over the world in some cases. Yeah. And then you had a family and had little kids, couldn't do as much of that stuff.
Yep.
And so you started dedicating yourself to some of this craft that you could learn at home. I identify with that because I feel like inside of people there's this space that we want to fill up with, and for us and for the people listening to this podcast, probably want to fill up with outdoor adventure related.
Absolutely.
Just, something inside of that field. And I find that you don't always have to fill it with the most exciting, crazy, extreme of what you're interested in to fulfill that thing inside of you.
That's right.
I mean, and I've got some examples in my life of similar things when it's like, no, I can't go do that, but I can do this,
right,
and find real satisfaction in doing this thing.
Yeah, I mean, for some guys, it's reloading ammunition.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
For other guys, it's tying flies.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think for a lot of guys, it's shooting bows. In the outdoor industry, there's so much emphasis on like you scroll through Instagram, Facebook, and all these influential hunters and hunters. Like they're shooting their bow. Oh, it's great to shoot your bow. I think people use that as a tool to just fill up that space inside of them.
There's no doubt.
Because you don't have to. I'm going to get known as the guy that says you don't have to practice with your bow. I'm okay with that. You don't have to practice that much to be able to kill a deer at 20 yards.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I think, and then it kind of becomes like this major, massive focus. Like hitting a pie plate at 20 yards with a compound bow is not the limiting factor of hunting.
No.
It's awesome that we like to shoot,
right,
and that becomes something that we like dial in. And there are certainly Western guys that are shooting animals at longer distance and are going to kill more game because they're good shooters.
Right.
Most of the time, not though.
Yeah.
Irrelevant, but I like what you said there because I can identify with like dialing in to something a little bit different. But that's building your repertoire of functionality,
And I don't want to create the image that I'm not walking out in the woods with nothing and building my arrows out there and then hunting. You know what I mean? Like that's a whole other thing. I mean, I have done some extended trips where I have walked out into the what I would say very remote wilderness and carried no modern camping gear. I've gone out on trips with stone tools and things like that and tried to hunt. And I can tell you right now, it's incredibly difficult. If you think you're going to go out there and do it,
You know what? With the backdrop of our modern lives, I think it's almost impossible to really replicate the drive and the necessity of living that way. Like we could go out and think that we could replicate exactly what it would be like to be a Native American and have no choice but to survive out there. But it is impossible to replicate that because we always have a backdrop.
There's always something going on. Yeah.
Well, there's always, a
fallback plan.
Unless there was somebody that said, literally, I will go in the woods and die. Like I'm not walking back to the truck. And nobody says that.
No one does. And I've tried to push it pretty hard. I've done things where I lost over 20 pounds.
Really?
Yeah, where on backcountry trips because I was trying to do that exact thing. And you walk out a little later looking like you were in a prison camp for a while, and most people that's not very appealing. That's not doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but if you you don't know what you're capable of unless you pull the trigger sometimes. So you got to figure it out for yourself.
That's cool, man. Okay, flint napping. I want to talk a little bit more.
Yep.
Give us a short description of like how you would take, like what kind of material you'd use and how you would nap
so
it.
we're working with what most people call flint, but that can end up being it's some type of rock that fractures predictably through something called a Hertzian cone. And so glass will do that. You can use modern glass because it's an amorphous material.
What kind of rock is it? Is it it's a metamorphic or igneous? Would it be a metamorphic rock?
Yeah, it can be like, so for example, you've got obsidian, right? Like that was a very classic one that Native Americans would have mined from volcanic areas, right? You've got stuff like that. But then you also have, like down in Texas, there's many, many different types of chert that occur down there. So you have things like Pedernales chert and Georgetown and a lot of these.
And this is a smooth rock.
It's a very
that would
smooth
almost be
rock.
like
and
porcelain or something.
The key thing about it is it fractures predictably. That's what you have to have. You can't use sandstone. You're not using sedimentary rocks really of any kind that I'm aware of. So they've got to be heated ahead of time because that creates this crystalline structure within the stone that is needed in order to predict how the stone is going to flake.
What would so up here, like like right in this particular area, I don't think there's.
Yeah, so there is some chert around here for sure
that you could nap.
Yeah, that you could nap. But the thing is it's really coarse grained. The coarser the grain it is, the harder the stone is to work.
Okay.
So north of here, there are some bands of chert, and within Arkansas, I mean, we have what is it called? Pitkin. Over you have Crowley's Ridge. There's some chert over there that's pretty good, and then on up into Missouri, there's some actually world class types of chert up there that people really like. And another good classic example is that's one thing I'm very interested in personally is learning more about our local types of chert and flint that we have. But it goes back again, like I think I mentioned already, is like, how do you want to spend your time? Do you want to spend your time looking for the stuff, or do you want to spend your time making arrowheads?
Yeah.
And for me, I wish my knowledge was better in terms of what is locally available, but I'd rather just learn more about making arrowheads. At least at this point, I'm still learning in that. So lots of times I trade for stone, or there's places online you can buy it if you want to. And I have, gone around even just around here, and I've gotten into a habit where you pick up a piece of stone, you take another rock and you strike it. And based upon how it breaks, you can determine pretty quickly if it is a good candidate to try to make a point out of.
Okay.
And it just takes some time to recognize that. But from there, you've got to have a toolkit, right? And so there's different types of percussion in the way that you strike the surface of the stone.
Is it called percussion napping? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, so there's different kinds of percussion. You have hard hammer and soft hammer percussion. So example of hard hammer would be pick up a rock, hit it with another rock, right?
Okay.
So soft hammer would be using antler or horn or something like that.
Yeah.
And or even wood in some cases, although that's much less common. And so you have direct percussion, where I'm holding the stone in one hand and I strike it with an antler on the other hand. And you have indirect percussion. And that's where you have like a piece of antler that, you're balancing the stone on your leg. You have another piece of antler that you're holding at a particular angle. And then you strike that antler with another antler. That's indirect percussion.
Got it.
And you started to see kind of a resurgence, especially if you want to jump in the circles of flint napping on Instagram and all that type of stuff. You see a lot of guys doing that stuff because to some degree it gives you a higher level of control in
the
terms
indirect
of
percussion.
because of the angle that you can control a little bit better.
I see.
But it does require a little bit more tools.
So you're taking if you were trying to make a point the size of an arrowhead, which most people would understand, something like under 2 inches long, maybe, and maybe 1.5 inch wide.
Yep.
Like how big of a rock would you have to start with? Piece
so
of flint?
It depends, but oftentimes what you do is you'll start with a large stone if you have it, and you'll knock off what's called a spall or a large flake.
Okay.
And so first you remove a large flake from that piece, and that large flake, ideally if you're starting out with something, is maybe going to be, somewhere 4 to 6 inches and thin. Ideally, because the thinner you start with, the easier it is to get to an arrowhead.
Yeah.
If you start with something that with a big hump on it that we often refer to as a turtleback, that's a problem you got to deal with, and so you're just setting yourself up to be challenged. So a nice thin flake or a spall. Then from there, you'll use one of these percussion methods to whittle that thing down to a point or to the shape of something that you feel like is close to what you're after. Then the next stage that you'll move on to is pressure flaking. And that's what many people are familiar with. Modern people or modern flint nappers tend to use copper pressure flakers. And there is definitely evidence that native peoples also actually smelted copper and used copper tips to flake points. Yeah, that we don't have a whole lot of research about that, but I have read things that prove that even when they had the abilities to create copper tools, their skills were so much more refined at making stone tools, and it was so hard to smelt that copper that they realized that if they could just get a little bit of copper, they were way more efficient at making stone tools with it. And so, but traditionally what people think about is tips of antler, and that's often referred to as abo or aboriginal napping. And so if you want to do it, and again, just like anything you're into.
What was the first stage when you're just banging out the kind of general shape of the head?
That's percussion.
Okay,
yeah.
and then
you move to pressure flaking.
So percussion.
Yep.
and then pressure flaking.
And pressure flaking is where you're putting that serrated edge on the actual stone point itself,
And so the stone, the way the stone flakes, you can put pressure, put it on your leg.
Yep. You can either hold it in your hand or correct. You need something to protect yourself. Otherwise you're driving these razor sharp microflakes into your hand or into your leg. And so, yes, typically you use a piece of leather to protect yourself. And then you're either holding it in your hand or pushing it on your thigh or above your knee on your leg. And you're applying pressure at a particular angle with the flaking tool, whether that's copper.
Tip, really small, fine tip, like it could be copper, it could be the tip of an antler.
Exactly.
Popping it down.
Yep. And
flaking it off.
Yep. And in order to create a nice smooth point, you need to be able to run flakes at least halfway across. Because if you can't get halfway across on each side, so let's say we have an arrowhead, right? So we have an arrowhead like this, and I'm driving flakes on this side, and I'm driving flakes on this side. Well, if they don't overlap slightly, you're going to end up with this middle part that doesn't get flaked away. And so it's not going to be the right shape.
Blades,
there you go. The problem is, though, is that part is going to be it
won't be sharp.
It won't be sharp, and it's going to there's resistance there, right?
Yeah,
when it enters.
So that's a problem.
Exactly, it's problematic. So you want to make sure that those flakes are and it's a lot easier to understand when you see it, right? Than explaining it. But as you whittle these things down or chip them down, you end up with something hopefully that's generally pretty symmetrical. And I mean, and they're razor sharp. I mean, there's no question.
That was my next question is, okay, when I first started messing around with flint points, I spent a year or two hunting with them.
Yeah.
And my question, I never even shot at an animal with one. Like, I didn't commit the whole season, so it would be like I was picking and choosing when I was bringing the flint point.
Yep.
And it just seemed like every time I chose not to bring it, that's when I'd get a shot at an animal. When I brought it, I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. My thing was, like, how effective of a killing tool is this?
It's very, I mean, you can look at it a few different ways. One is, in modern times anyway, we still have to look at like how ethical is it to hunt with a tool like that. And so, it needs to be razor sharp, and if it's not, it's not appropriate. When I say razor sharp, it's contradictory in some ways because modern broadheads are not serrated, right?
Yeah.
They're like a knife blade. But I guess that's not a good example either because a knife can be serrated. But it's like a razor edge, literally, right? And, for me, if I'm hunting with a steel broadhead, I need to be able to slice paper with that thing. And if I can, it's not sharp enough.
Yeah.
Well, you can't use the same measuring stick for a stone point. Because it doesn't work the same way as a regular broadhead. Okay. A regular broadhead will slice through flesh very cleanly. In contrast to that, a stone point has these micro edges. They'll come, literally, it's a serration that comes to a tip along the side.
Because of the napping.
Exactly. And it tears flesh. Rather than kind of cutting through it as it moves through. So the two components that a stone point needs in order to be functionally appropriate, at least in my mind, is the tip needs to be like a needle. It needs to be razor sharp because your entry point exactly.
Once you get that initial cut.
Yep. So that's the first characteristic that it's got to have. The next thing is that those serrations, the tips of those serrations. I mean, if I take one of mine and I just drag it quickly across my hand, it's going to cut my hand open. And if you can't do that, then it's not sharp enough to hunt with.
Okay.
And so, it takes time definitely to get them to the point where, and I'm not saying you couldn't kill a deer with one that wasn't that sharp, but it's just simply not going to perform as well. And I think, if we're talking about a Native American 1,000 years ago, I'm not here to say whether or not I know anything about what their ethics were back then, right? Their ethics were they needed to eat. Yes. And they were going to do whatever they needed to do.
They were motivated from a little bit different direction.
Exactly. And they would have taken shots that we simply wouldn't take today as ethical hunters simply because,
their life depended on it.
Exactly.
Just like ours would if our life depended on us every time we hunted.
Precisely. So I'm not going to take a gut shot on an animal knowingly, but I feel almost confident that they would have because they were trying to eat and or they had to eat. And so, but having said that, if you're going to do something like that, there are still considerations, that you have to take. But, properly prepared stone point, there's no doubt in my mind, if it's placed
Incredible.
in the vitals.
When you think about the breadth of human history, I mean, humans have been surviving a shorter amount of time using modern technologies for dispatching animals than they had using stone points. Yeah. I mean, humanity was built on the back of a stone point. And so that's why it's bizarre. That's why it's ironic that like we would even be having a discussion about whether this is ethical.
It is.
I mean, I'm all for the conversation, but like the people that would say it's unethical, I would just say, man, why don't you go back and study a little bit of human history?
Well, and the other thing that, to me, to sort of flip that on its head in a way that's so interesting is there are more people flint napping right now than there have been in probably 1,000 years. And it's crazy as it is, it's because of Instagram. It's because of all of YouTube. It's because of all these, resources. So, I'm definitely one of these guys that, to some degree, that falls in the camp of like, our internet's this double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much junk out there, and there's a lot of negative that comes, whether or not it's something as simple as staring into a screen all day for a kid, or just all this negativism, right, that comes from whether in whatever form that takes. But there's this other side where, you have this community that is and I don't care what your thing is, there's a community out there for it, online that are sharing skills and doing that. And that's the cool part. And because of that, there are a lot of resources that up until very recently, the last few years, not have been available to people. And so,
when you think about the communication, we bought this book the other day, this Foxfire book.
You've heard of these? Oh yeah, I've got some of them.
This would have been the way to preserve these like ancient technologies.
Absolutely.
Man, communication, modern video, like all this stuff is revolutionized the human experience to something that we don't even know what direction it's going.
No.
I mean, it's bizarre because like, you didn't have to know a Native American. You didn't have to know somebody that,
right.
I mean, you went on the internet and learned how to nap.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that still doesn't take the place of having a very experienced person show you.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, create that or have that misconception there, because there's no exception for a good teacher or someone that has hands-on skill, and that's across the board, whatever you're into. But unfortunately for me, there kind of wasn't anybody around me that could show me, so I just kind of had to figure it out. And of course, a lot of it's just trial and error. I mean, anyone that wants to get into flint napping, I'm like, okay, well, you're going to basically pulverize a couple 100 pounds of rocks and turn them into dust, and you're going to get real frustrated. And then at some point, you're going to end up with something that's starting to look like an arrowhead. And then from there, it's just going to be slowly but surely. You'll keep on refining it.
Man, right here, I'll show you when we're done. I've got a collection of stone points, many of which I've found on this property.
Yeah, on your property, yeah.
And you can see the difference in skill level.
Oh, yeah.
And that's so fascinating to pick up a stone point. Like there's one up here that I could show you that like, you just wonder, you're like, man, I bet a 14-year-old boy made that one.
I've had really interesting discussions with people about like, was this a beginner or was it a kid? You know? And then the other thing is like I've definitely talked with people that are of the impression that like, okay, if there's a tribe or a community of early people, I feel like maybe there was one guy and he was the napper, and he's building points and tools for everybody, and all the other guys are the hunters. You know what I mean? So it's kind of fun to think about, like how that or versus up. Like, was each hunter, did he have his own style and his own? I think there's a lot of argument to say that's probably less likely, because flint napping is very time consuming.
Yeah.
So to think that, you're going to make all your own tools and all this stuff and then go hunting, sure, it's possible, no doubt about it. But I think there's a case to be made, because there's no doubt that like some people just kind of get it. They just gravitate towards it, right?
Yeah.
And there's locally we have that up in Bentonville. We've got that Native American Museum. If you haven't been up there,
incredible. I've been there.
That place is incredible,
world class.
One of the, and I don't know if it's still up there because I think it was on loan, but there's a tool up there called the Sweetwater Biface, and it was found in Texas. And to my knowledge, no modern napper has been able to replicate this tool.
Really? What's it called?
It's called the Sweetwater Biface.
I'll have to look
and
that up. Sweetwater Biface.
There's a ratio of width to thickness that very skilled nappers will try to emulate. And once you get so wide, you can only get so thin, right? Before it gets very difficult to do. And that particular face, among artifacts, is world class. I mean, it's as good as almost anything because it's crazy wide. I want to say it's like 19 or so millimeters wide, and it's like crazy thin, and it's just unbelievable that whoever made it was.
You said
master.
Did you mean centimeters? 19 centimeters.
Yes, sorry.
He had his fingers. I understood what you were saying.
Yeah.
Like 3 inches or something.
Exactly.
It's like 3 inches wide, but like paper thin.
Exactly. Yeah, it's unbelievable when you look at it in profile. If you dropped it on this concrete floor, it would shatter into 20 pieces.
Wow.
And it's a remarkable artifact.
Fascinating stuff.
It is.
I've got to say this just because it's on my mind. All these points found in my front yard. I was pretty heavily ridiculed the other day online for. Did you see any of that?
A little bit.
Okay,
I mean, there's no shortage of opinions out there. That's for sure.
So I wrote an article for Meat Eater that was on. That was called 6 Tips for Finding Stone Points.
I do recall that.
Yep. And man, I just wrote these 6 tips for finding stone points,
Right.
I mean, just kind of like practical places to look. And we made mention early in the article about how, you need to check your regulations.
Right.
Because technically it's illegal to take basically anything off of public land.
Any type of public land, that's right. It's illegal.
And man, I was skewered.
Yeah.
With I had people like private messaging me. Like just.
People take that stuff very seriously.
And, what I was trying to say was, on private land where you have permission to gather stone points, like there were people like trying to say that it would have better for me to have left all these stone points in my front yard.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially that's what they were saying.
Right.
But I realized it's one of these like mass communication kind of misses because what they were saying was that I was encouraging people to loot archaeological sites.
Right. Which was not at all your point.
Zero my point.
Right.
Even one person who I engaged with a little bit, he seemed like a normal guy. I was like, so you're telling me that you want me to call maybe the University of Arkansas to come out to my front yard and set up an archaeological dig?
Right.
And I was like, man, there's not enough time, not enough money. There's more places that are better. So you want me to just leave my stone points in the front yard? And he was kind of like,
right.
He was kind of like, well, no, but, and I was like, okay, well then that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about legal. I'm not even necessarily talking about, anyway, that's a whole different story, but people get cranked up about it.
To get down. And you have to recognize that there's a lot of ways to look at that. And I think you tried to do your due diligence about, doing things ethically and being responsible and that sort of thing. But everyone, you ask 10 people, you get 10 different opinions, right?
Yeah.
And I certainly am a proponent, of not doing anything illegal in terms of removing points from public land. And the other thing is being respectful to First Peoples in terms of, but the fact of the matter is, unless you're an archaeologist and you come in, knowing at what point said stone point was made, are we talking about a Osage, Native American that lived in the Ozarks several hundred years ago? Or are we talking about an atlatl point that was from an early archaic period that no one knows, even what current Native Americans may or may not have been related to that individual, right?
Yeah.
And so you just open up this can of worms that there's kind of no answer to. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be, respectful to those first peoples, that came and traveled through this country. But at the same time, it's a tricky subject.
Well, and I didn't want to open up a can of worms because I'm all for preservation of archaeological sites and respect. I mean, to me, those stone points sitting right there and me showing every person that comes in this office, that is like a massive
you're paying homage to those people that were here. Absolutely. I mean, you're showing those to your kids. You show them to people, your guests, that come in here, and you're like, look at this amazing thing that I found.
And these people. I always bring it back to the people. Like I think about the human, that touch this. I know that's what everybody does. So anyway, that's totally off topic, but I had to bring that up because I haven't publicly addressed that, but it's like, I'm not for looting archaeological sites or doing anything illegal.
Right.
But if I see a stone point in my front yard, I'm going to pick it up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show honor to.
And I think most people would. I mean, again, not to sit here and talk about what's right or wrong, but, otherwise, how does anyone ever know about it?
Right.
You know what I mean? I guess if you could go look in a museum, but I don't know. There's
well, what's wild to me is I wouldn't have known this till I started paying attention.
Yeah.
And looking on the ground.
Right.
Is that, man, the Native American occupation was widespread across this continent. They were everywhere.
They were everywhere.
And they were here for so long.
Yeah, thousands of years.
There's probably a stone point under the foundation of this building we're in right now. That no one, just like something happened here. There was a human interaction here that left evidence of a stone. It was the way that they lived.
That's right.
And, but no, hey, one last question on the napping.
Okay.
Have you taken an animal?
Not with a stone point. No.
Okay.
And
still working on that.
Part of the reason that I haven't is because I was not confident that my points were ready.
Okay.
And for me, it was very much an ethical stone point. Now I have carried them with me, just to sort of start getting the feel for it and everything. Yeah. But you better believe this fall, I'm going to be carrying stone points. It's time. Yeah.
Well, man, that's a great place to talk about. Like, so now we have this pretty good picture of who you are, like a mountaineer, well-traveled inside of that world, and then also a hunter. What is we live in a area that's for Arkansas is a pretty wealthy area for Arkansas. I mean, what am I trying to get at? What are the cultural divides between hunters and your outdoorsman that's a non-hunter?
I think a lot of it, quite honestly, comes down to a lack of knowledge or a miscommunication a lot of times, because there's sometimes an assumption, the shop that I work at, Pack Rat in Fayetteville, we sell technical equipment for hikers, climbers, canoeists, those types of things. We do now carry longbows, but it's for purposes of recreational archery. At this time, we're not necessarily promoting hunting, but I guess my point is that those are the types of folks, traditionally that are coming in, to the shop. Now, if a guy who normally doesn't do those things and he's a hunter, but he's getting ready to go on a trip and he needs a camping stove, and he's like, oh, well, I can't get it at X or Y hunting shop where I got my bow or where I bought my camo, but I'm going to go down there to that shop because they sell that kind of stuff. I have seen it. There a lot of times is automatically like they expect sometimes to be looked down upon a little bit, or just like not understood. And, certainly sometimes there is a lack of information, right, in terms of like what it is that you're actually doing when you're out there, because people that don't have a hunting background, they're just not educated in it. And sometimes, they don't realize that some of the very best allies for conservations are hunters, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that.
Yeah.
But from all they see is the killing, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I'm sure you guys would probably also agree that there are plenty of hunters out there that go do things that are not ethical. They act and they give the rest of us
the negative stereotype of the redneck hunter.
I mean, I've seen it time and time again, unfortunately, in Goshen, Arkansas, where I do a lot of my deer hunting. Guys will road hunt and they shoot a deer and they leave it laying there. And they don't even bother to get the meat, and they probably didn't have a hunting license. And there's nothing for me worse than, seeing something like that.
And that's a poacher.
That's a poacher. That's not a hunter. That's right.
Yeah,
I mean, they hunted, but they're not as far as I'm concerned, not a hunter.
Right.
But the average person that is not a hunter they don't know the difference, right? Or they haven't been educated. Or maybe some people do, right? But a lot of people, they just see that and they're disgusted by it, and there's a misconception there. So I think that, I guess in the end, I would say don't jump to conclusions or whatever you want to call it in terms of like what others people perception is of you and what you're doing, because what I have seen, I've got rock climber buddies that are crazy passionate turkey hunters. I've got people I know that love to hike, but they're also deer hunters. And more often than not, especially in some place like Arkansas, there's a heritage here. And I think that there's a lot of other towns, small towns around the country where there's a heritage here. Now, obviously you get into more metropolitan areas, that starts to fade away. At least that's been my experience, right? Yeah. You didn't have that uncle or that your grandpa or your brother, whoever that sort of was doing that when you were growing up. And so you don't have any sense of their ethics and what their life experiences were and how they handled themselves when it comes to, harvesting and game animals. But there's a whole lot more that connects us than separates us.
Yeah.
And, I guess one thing I'd make kind of a shameless plug for is the BHA, which I'm involved in. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And that's one of the reasons that I've gravitated to that group is I feel like they're a group that recognizes that. And they recognize that, everybody has a right to kind of recreate, at least within the spectrum of doing it responsibly. And as long as you're not damaging the environment or, harvesting game animals, either illegal, exactly, whatever that looks like, we all kind of have a right to be there. And I'm often, surprised. I mean, sure, you got your diehard hunter guys and all they do is hunt and they don't do anything else. Mm-hmm. And you have your diehard, whether it's road bikers or rock climbers or whatever, but most of us like to do multiple things.
Yeah.
And you don't have to get very far into a conversation to realize that we all just want to be outside doing things we love. You know what I mean? And so,
I think a lot of it boils down to perceived identity. Like what I see inside like the hiking, mountaineering, rock climbing world, like what you feel when you go into like a high end outdoor store like Pack Rat, is you feel this sense of like strong identity inside of this thing.
Yep.
Okay. When you go into a hunting store or when you go into, you feel this identity.
Yep.
And that's where I think there's a bridge that can be built inside. The extremes of both of those could be at odds with each other and the struggle of identity, because like a mountaineer typically would be somebody that would be like aware of the environment and wanting like no trace left behind, like a bunch of these like great things.
Yep.
And he might perceive, or his worldview of a hunter might be that that's not what that hunter is. Right. That hunter is taking from this.
Yes.
Well, when you really get down to the brass tacks and you don't view the extremes of the negative side of hunting, you realize that, hey, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of guys that are very conscientious about the environment. And then when you understand the North American Model of Wildlife Conservation and the funding of the Pittman-Robertson Act and how that wild places and all this, and wildlife conservation is funded by the dollars of hunting, then there is this like super overlap of people that enjoy wild places. And I think that it's there's probably a lot more room for the mountaineer, hunter, hiker, canoeer, just general outdoor person to step into hunting. I mean, like, because and I guess what I want to do and what I see you doing is that, and what I see BHA doing better than anybody. Say what you want about BHA.
Sure.
Say that they're a liberal, left wing, whatever.
Right.
Man, those guys are bringing in new hunters into our space, and that is what we need. And I just opened up a can of worms by saying that, and maybe we'll directly address that at some point. But man, the guys that I know that are in BHA are hardcore hunters. They're good hunters. They're the real deal. They're me.
Sure.
They're you.
Yep.
They're Colby.
Yep. That's been my experience. And again, I'm not going to sit here and I know a tiny percentage of them.
Right.
But I can only speak from what what I'd like to see moving forward in terms of like for the health of hunting.
Yeah.
And I guess another component that I've noticed is more and more young people are starting to be aware of where their food comes from, what that looks like. And I know a lot of people that a hunter would very easily call a tree hugger or like a granola kind of person, right? And
that's kind of that social odds thing.
But that person, I can think of a handful of acquaintances that I have right now. That person, they don't hunt, they don't want to hunt, but they would rather see a person go and ethically harvest a deer or an antelope or whatever it may be and feed their family that way than go to, X or Y big supermarket and buy a piece of beef that came from a stockyard that was pumped full of hormones and all this other stuff, because they understand that in the big picture, it's better for all of us. It's better for the planet. When things happen that way. And it's you can't really argue that that's not a more natural course of action.
Yes.
Right. And just this one thing, like when we eat deer meat at my house, I talked to my kids about where this meat came from and, why, we're choosing to eat it. And yes, an animal had to die, but because that animal died, it's feeding us and it's just a big circle, right?
Yeah.
It comes back around into itself again. And so, I can only have just so far of a reach. And for me, my kids is kind of where I start that at.
Yeah.
But even with friends and other folks, I've been really pleased to see a number of people that I've reached through the archery side of things that have been like, I'm not sure if I want to hunt, but shooting a bow looks pretty cool, but it's not very far into shooting a bow.
The next
that
step.
It's like, well, so tell me about this deer hunting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Man, that's what we've got to do. We've got to find a way to build cultural bridges, and it's human to human interaction. It's finding a way to be who we are, but not be stiff arming some group that ought to be on our side. And I think we can do that through. I don't know. We've got to be better at our narrative.
It's crazy, and I feel like I say this a lot to people that are close to me, and it sounds oversimplified, but I don't know how else to say it. And literally, it just comes down to like a simple definition of respect. And respect just means like being aware and to some degree kind of honoring someone else's traditions and, what their life is about, and simply not immediately assuming that you're not going to agree with that person because they don't do the things that you do, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, it's time consuming to have a conversation, especially if you do it on, with an individual. But that's the negative side to all of this social media and internet stuff that we've got, because it's created the keyboard warrior, right?
Yes.
It's real easy to take cheap shots at people when you're sitting in your living room behind your computer screen, and it drives me crazy. Yeah. You know what I mean? And there's plenty of folks out there that could probably care less about what you're actually talking about, but they just jump in there and make a negative comment, stir the pot up, and then they get out, right?
Yeah.
And then it starts to erode from there. So it's not convenient and it isn't easy, but I guess, to the limit of my influence as an individual, I would just tell people, like, before you make your initial assessment on a person for something they said or something they did or they don't look like you or whatever, just like maybe take a second and consider, what their angle was and that sort of thing. And, I really do think that when people like actually stop, we're all just humans. We all need the same stuff, and of course you're always going to have fringe people that are morons. We all know that. You're always going to have, the world is...
Got to calculate for the moron.
You do. I mean, those people are out there, and I'm not saying that there aren't, because a lot of times people are just flat wrong. But at the same time, most of us can find common ground.
Yeah.
And I think that's a skill that we have gotten away from.
Here's a phrase that I've been hearing come up in a couple of often, and I think it's a term that sociologists would use. Maybe it's kind of a, not slang, but tribalism. Like tribalism could be described. I mean, we would find it in modern society. And basically, my wife described this to me the other day. Tribalism is a mentality that says there's us and then there's them.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the politically charged environment that we live in
right.
is pushing people deeper and deeper into tribalism.
Yeah.
And tribalism is, and the phrase tribalism has nothing to do with like native cultures.
Right.
Like when we hear that word, sometimes we like go back in history. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about like sociological or like just like default ways that humans segregate themselves.
Right.
And I mean, it could be in a room of 10 people and you leave them in there for 2 hours and you'll find that there's groups that begin to form.
Yep.
And like, and so generally when it comes to solving problems, tribalism is negative.
Sure.
And so like I look at it like that, and man, I'm guilty. I mean, like in thinking about the outdoor, like the, kind of like thinking about the outdoor guy, it's like, I think he's different than me.
Right.
He goes to the mountains, but he's different than me. He probably doesn't understand me. He probably is judging me because I'm a hunter. He probably thinks I'm a barbarian. Like all these things like reinforce my bias. And really, when I met you, I didn't know, I mean, even up until a month ago, I didn't know that you were involved with Pack Rat. And for those who wouldn't, I mean, Pack Rat is like the place for mountaineering, climbing. It's a beautiful, awesome store. And so like, it's kind of like, I've known that for ever since I've been in Fayetteville.
Right.
Pack Rat. Right. Like I would have been like, man, Pack Rat's really not my dig.
A lot of people feel that way.
Well, and it's crazy. Yeah. And then I meet you and I'm like, oh man, here's this guy who is deep inside of all this adventure sports and stuff. And I thought those people, I mean, I'm just confessing, I would have thought that those people would not have tipped their hat to the hunting world. And I think it's both of us kind of dropping that tribalism in a way and finding ways to be inclusive. And that's what, I
think you're exactly right. And I mean, quite frankly, I don't see a way around solving a lot of modern problems we have in life unless we look at it that way.
Yeah.
We have to learn how to have conversations with each other and not get worked up about it. Like that so much of the time.
Usually it's not the other guy, it's you that has the problem. Like when I was like me thinking about like not being, and when I say
judged
not being welcome, I mean like I might have felt uncomfortable like wearing like if I was decked out in full camo.
You got a meat eater shirt on, or whatever.
Usually the problem is with you. When I say you, I'm pointing to myself.
Yes.
Like, so when I met you, even the preconceived ideas that, probably the people of this place aren't cool with hunting. That was my problem, actually.
Yep.
Because it wasn't true.
And I'm as guilty as anybody. I've been in the exact same, scenario in other, aspects and of things that I've gotten into that I wasn't as familiar with. And I was like, oh, if these, this is kind of a different group of people that I'm used to hanging around. And right away, it's like you put your fence up, right?
Yeah,
you put your
yeah.
guard up a little bit, maybe before you really should. But again, we're all a product of our life experiences, and we're used to being in, for lack of a better term, kind of a little bit of a tribe. We're used to being around a certain type of group of people that often have a particular set of values that you identify with very easily. And as soon as you cross over into another, tribe, or, whatever you want to call that, some of those things start to come into question. But I would say sometimes that happens needlessly.
Yes.
And that's not to say it isn't going to happen, because it will. You're going to come to issues with people. But I don't know if we all just kind of take a step back sometimes and look at things for what they are. I think we make a lot of bigger deal out of things than we should.
Well, the truth is that there's a methodology or a philosophy for the preservation of something where people would retreat to their fortresses. I've heard that phrase. And for modern hunters to retreat to the fortress, which to me, that would be like my native thing. My native frequency would be like, oh, we gotta stick even further to the things that our fathers did.
Right.
Actually, the way to save hunting, which our biggest threat to our way of life and this thing that we love and the wildlife that we love and the wild places that we love, is recruitment of new people.
Yes.
And
education.
And so we have to find ways to keep the gate open.
It's funny you say that, because I think on one of your recent podcasts I listened to, you were using the term "guard the gate."
Guard the gate,
right?
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that you just kind of flipped that, right?
Yeah.
You also maybe guard the gate, like that's one term, but I think mind the gate. Is maybe even sometimes a better way to think about it, because it's not like when you say guard the gate, you want to protect, and I believe that there's a reason to protect what it is that you love, but you don't want to guard the gate to the extent that you don't let anyone else in.
Right.
Because at that point, you're kind of dooming yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because I know you've got that picture back here of that hunting scene.
Yeah. Did you see
I've
that?
heard that one where you were talking about that, and that's gone now, right?
Yeah.
And if all we do is guard the gate, at some point down the road, our stuff's going to be done too.
Well,
we have to have at least enough wherewithal and forward thinking that it's like, we're going to be a little bit careful about things, but we got to let some people in too.
Yeah. And I got to clarify the guard the gate metaphor. That to me, like what we're talking about to me is guarding the gate. Like,
I get that.
Just the semantics, because we have used that so much. Like to me, the guard the gate idea is building a strong narrative, building a strong culture, and particularly that phrase we use when we're talking about like adamant, intentional anti-hunting sentiment that is designed to. I was looking at the Humane Society of America website today, actually. And, one of their 6 mission statements is, ending hunting.
Yeah.
And they use the term trophy hunting, which obviously that is a inflammatory phrase that they use to try to portray us in a certain way.
Yes.
Whatever.
Right.
But point being, that's to me this is, guarding the gate. But not to get on semantics.
I understand what you're saying though.
But we have to find ways to be inclusive, and ultimately bring people into, it's not like we're just wanting to preserve the stuff we get to do that we like, but man, the outdoor space, clean, healthy meat, the things that hunting has done for me is something that I would like to share with people.
Absolutely. And, there's always byproducts of just maybe you're not into bird watching, but by taking steps towards conservation and whatever it is you're into, it makes the area better for those people that are into bird watching, right, or whatever. So there's so many ways that these things can cross over. And I just, in my gut, I've always believed that we have a whole lot more to gain by working together, and a whole lot to lose if we don't.
Yes.
And so that's one of the reasons that I'm involved with Arkansas BHA, because no organization is perfect. They're not going to have all the answers, and they're going to do things that, not everybody agrees with. But I think they're trying to put the best foot forward. And they're trying to do it to protect, first and foremost, protect the resources of hunters and anglers, but they're trying to do it in such a way, at least from my perspective, they're trying to do it in a way that is not off-putting to other people in the outdoor community, in the outdoor industry. And I kind of don't see another way forward.
Yeah. Man, I was at the BHA Rendezvous a couple years ago when Yvon Chouinard, is that how you say his name?
Yvon Chouinard. Yeah.
Chouinard.
Owner of Patagonia.
He spoke at the BHA Rendezvous. Yeah. Owner of and founder of Patagonia, 80-year-old man. Mm-hmm. Man, I thought that was awesome. Incredible that this guy, a billionaire, number one, and not that gives him value. He seems to me to be a pretty incredible man.
He's a down-to-earth
massive proponent of wild places. And will tip his hat to hunting.
Absolutely.
I mean, he was in a room with 1,500 bad to the bone Western hunters, and he's sitting up there telling stories about pulling over to throw a roadkill deer in the back of his truck to take it home and eat it. And I had people message me and ridicule me because I put something up that had his name on it.
Yeah.
And this one guy said, "Did you know that Yvon Chouinard is against hunting brown bears in the Yellowstone ecosystem, or in the greater Yellowstone area?" And at the time I actually didn't. I said, "No, I didn't." And I was like, "I don't know why that has any impact on me saying that what just happened with this guy coming and tipping his hat to us."
Right.
And that story right there to me describes kind of, again, this polarization. Like, basically this guy was saying is, if you don't agree with me 100%, then we can't be friends.
That's it.
Well, man, I won't have a friend on the planet.
None of us will.
And to me, for somebody from Patagonia tipping their hat to the hunting world, which they're not gaining anything from that. They've got such a massive market, like the little market of hunters that they could gain from,
No.
And we're not going to buy Patagonia clothing anyway. We're wearing a lot of other stuff.
Sure.
Like, what I'm saying is, he's got a lot more to lose than he does to gain. We've got a massive amount that we could gain from, and I'm not saying, and what that guy's saying is that we would be lowering our standards to let some of these people into our space. To me, that's retreating to the fortress. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, basically, man, we just can't do it. And I am not happy that he is. I mean, I am for the science-based wildlife management practices in a small. We could get into all the details.
Right.
Is Clay Newcomb for hunting brown bear or grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem under a quota and science-based management? Absolutely.
Right.
Am I offended and unwilling to work with Yvon Chouinard because he thinks that?
Right.
You're crazy.
Well, and then the other thing is like, who can possibly be educated and informed enough to understand the science behind all these different issues, right? And at the end of the day, we're all humans. I've said plenty of things in my life, and I'm going to say plenty of things that I'll look back on and be like, you know what? I was wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think anybody that thinks otherwise is just kidding themselves. I mean, we're all just humans. We make mistakes, and we can change our mind. It's okay.
Right. That's
right. And it's just such in the environment that I see us in, and not just our own country, but around the world right now. It's just like, it just seems like no one's willing to go and change their mind. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to have a change in perspective. It's I don't know why that's so scary to some people, and I guess maybe I've made a whole lot more mistakes in my lifetime than a lot of the other people have. I don't know. And maybe I'm
you're still alive and you're a mountaineer, so you didn't make too many mistakes.
But, I just think that sometimes, again, it's just, calm down a little bit, take a step back, and it's going to be okay. Let's work together instead of trying to put each other down.
Yeah.
So...
Well, man, I admire what you're doing and the voice that you have inside, even just locally, in what you're doing. And I think you're a great spokesman for hunting to a bunch of people that probably wouldn't listen to or have a reason to listen to somebody like me or Colby. Mainly because Colby's from Texas, but Sorry, Colby. Just threw you under the bus for no reason whatsoever. I heard him go under. That's why Colby's here. That's why he's here. Man, I love your story. Respect what you're doing, and
yeah, well, likewise, man. I'm just was pleased to be asked to do this today. The content you've been putting out for a while now has been very high quality, and to have an opportunity to come and sort of be a part of that message that you've been doing your best to put out there. It was a great opportunity, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I guess we all have a role to play, and you can step back and live in your own bubble and just do you, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. And but I don't know. I look at my kids and I see the world we're living in, and I sure do feel like we could do better sometimes than we're doing, or at least maybe make some changes to put ourselves in maybe a more favorable trajectory for the young people that are coming up in the world right now.
Yep.
And I'm just a guy, but I want to do what I can to try to help make a difference. So
yeah. Right on. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so of course you mentioned already I'm a part owner, and officially my title at Packrat is I'm the equipment buyer, so all the gear and that stuff in the store, that's what my main responsibility. But I teach classes there as well, and they're various types of wilderness skills. Of course, a lot of that got put on hold due to COVID, but you can look us up at packratoc.com. But the place that I spend most of my time is on Instagram, and kind of show people what I'm into. And you can literally just Rick Spicer. Most of that is photography because I am an amateur photographer. I just love taking photographs on trips. So most of that stuff's just like kind of nature photography type of stuff, but Packrat Bushcraft on Instagram.
Yeah, so that's the Instagram handle that I knew you from, Packrat Bushcraft.
Yep, that's the main one that most people know me from, and that's where I'm just kind of spend my dirt time and whatever it is I'm into, whether it's building a bow or some arrows or doing friction fire or who knows, hunting, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So putting stuff out there, but.
Colby, do you have any questions for her?
I'm sure I do. I got caught up in the conversation of just listening, but
Colby's head is like on a swivel. It's just like back and forth.
Yeah, it's like back and forth.
We covered it.
You gotta interrupt us, man. The only way that you get any word edgewise between me and a guest of mine is to interrupt us.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground there too.
Yeah,
so,
we did.
So I guess my summary.
Yeah, give us a summary. Give us a summary.
Yeah.
The Colby Moorhead summary.
Yeah, I'm just deep in thought over here. No, I was just thinking about the whole thing between hunting and this adventurous lifestyle. And for me growing up, I got, without knowing it, I was caught up in the utility of hunting more so than the adventure. Just going out, it's like, this is successful if we come back with something, or the whole concept of catch and release fishing was out of my mindset,
Yeah.
And so since I've been here inside of Arkansas, I've begun to appreciate all these things where you don't have some utility or like going out and bringing back something tangible. So like I've gotten into hiking and road biking and fly fishing, and so all these things I've kind of gone the opposite direction, where I started out with the utility of hunting and I appreciated all the things that I got out of it, but I'd missed out on the whole adventurous side of it. So like when we went with mules to Montana,
example.
that was a big thing for me, to where it's like, man, this is actually fun to get out and just adventure instead of just going out and just seeing, hey, I'm just going out to fill the freezer. I don't care if it's a spike or whatever, know. And so I think that's the appreciation that I've come into inside of living inside of Arkansas versus Texas, where it's like you go from not having these, national forests and public lands to a place to where I can just go and roam without having to knock on some door or get a hold of somebody.
Yeah.
And so I think, like when you were talking about bushcraft, man, I'd like to do that, just understand more about, just build a adaptability inside of me, so that if I find myself in some situation, or just walking by some plant that I wouldn't know what it is now, if I'm walking down a trail and I see it, it's like, oh, that's cool,
Yeah.
And just growing this appreciation for the environment that I find myself in and draws me into, but just building an ability to, it's like a deeper level of communing with nature, where before my commune with nature would be like, I'm going to go and it's going to provide for me. I'm going to take something out of it, to where I can just go and just exist inside of it and get a lot of appreciation inside of that for me, myself, and, what I'm bringing back might be something different. It's just bringing back an experience rather than, oh, I'm going to go and actually like pull something out of it,
Absolutely.
I think that's something that we could learn from the adventure outdoor side. Because that's a great point, I think. It's a really notable point, Colby, because the hunting mind frame is to get something to bring back. The, adventure outdoorsman mind frame is for the experience.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a in the last some time in hunting, like we have talked about the experience a lot and how that's valuable. But still, like I think combining kind of these two ideologies, you probably get a really rich experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And, one thing that I can think back about, having stories with my dad or my grandpa about going out is like the older they got, the less they cared about actually getting anything.
Yeah.
They just wanted that time with their family and kind of communing with the natural environment, right? And as much as my grandpa loved to fish, he just wanted to be out there.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to see maybe is a little more of that mentality trickle down into younger people.
Yeah.
And it's not always about getting something,
Yeah.
And if you do, great. And the whole providing for your family thing, that's a critical component of hunting. And I think everyone should recognize that for what it is. But I think it's also okay just to look at it from, from you look at nowadays with all this COVID and craziness going on, we need wilderness and wild places right now, maybe more than we have in a long time for mental health reasons, right?
Yeah.
We're all, people are cooped up and you got to, whether it's wearing a mask or whatever it is, the ability to walk out into a place and just kind of not look at there's nature and here's me, but more of the I'm part of this. I came from this, and one day I'm going to go back to this.
Yeah.
And so I may as well figure out a way to kind of be connected to it. And I guess that's ultimately what's led me down the path that I have is like, I just like that feeling. I like the feeling of feeling like I'm more part of the woods than separated from it.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it.
I guess one last thing I'd mention, and unfortunately, like every other event I know of, it got canceled this year. But another thing that I do is I'm the director of a wilderness skills challenge that's called the Bruja Bushwhack.
Okay.
And it's kind of a mouthful, but there's a website for it. You can go to brujabushwhack.com.
Okay.
And it's kind of a cool thing that me and some friends started about 5 years ago. And so if the listeners, if you're familiar with an adventure race, right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically the way those traditionally would work was you'd get a topographical map, and there'd be points on that map, and you would you'd go like maybe ride a bike or run or hike and paddle a canoe and all these kinds of things, and you'd go find those points. Well, what we did was I decided I thought that was interesting, but I wanted to maybe make it a little more in the realm of this bushcraft and wilderness skills stuff. So the first thing we did was we took away the whole race component of it, and we designed it so that you can come in last and win.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't have anything to do with how fast you are.
Okay.
And so that was one of the first things that we did. And so instead of time-based, it's point-based. And so it's all about being a well-rounded outdoors person.
Okay.
So you still use a topographical map, but you go where you want, when you want. You plan your own course for the day. So it's about your ability to understand and read the map and create a plan, basically.
I see.
And when you successfully arrive at a location, there's a password. You write it down, and you get a point for that at the end of the day when you're graded, or you get a certain number of points. The next thing is there's some sort of wilderness skill that you have to show proficiency in, whether that's making a fire, doing some first aid, or paddling a canoe, or rope skills, whatever it may be.
Killing a squirrel.
There you go. And that brings up one of the things that we were going to go heavy in this year. I've done it in the past, but we always have primitive weapons. We do archery, we do atlatls, we do slingshots, we do blowguns, we do all kinds of stuff. There's always a primitive weapon.
I like it.
But this year, and this is probably a theme going forward, is that the teams were all going to have at least one person that was going to have a bow with them the whole time, and they're going to be shooting throughout the whole course. So that kind of changed the game a little bit in terms of making it a lot more interesting for archers and hunters and that type of thing. And then the third component of it is pure nature knowledge. So there'll be like key words or ID components to things like trees and plants and animal tracks, even stone points, and you have to tell me what those things are. You take the cumulative of all those different skills, and whoever gets the most point wins.
Wow,
And
that's cool,
so,
man.
It's a neat.
So when is it usually?
It's in April every year.
Okay.
And we have postponed it to.
Arkansas.
It's actually, if you're here in Arkansas, you may be familiar with it, but there's a place called Bird's Adventure Center on the Mulberry River.
Okay.
And that's where we have it every year.
Oh, wow.
I'm good friends with those folks, and they have a huge piece of private land. And in addition, I typically get permits from the Forest Service, and we go out. And so teams can expect, and you have to compete as a team because there's teamwork involved. Right. It's not a solo event. But you can expect to travel somewhere between 6 and 10 miles over the course of the day. So you cover some ground.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun. So if this type of stuff we've been talking about is interesting to you, and you'd maybe you'd like to kind of actually do something more directly related to it, you can check out that brew.
Could I use my mule?
You know what? I don't think I've ever been asked that before.
So it's not in the rule book, so yes, I can.
It doesn't say no anywhere. We might have to think about that.
What if I showed up on a mule?
We might have to think about that.
I was like, show it to me in the rule book.
Right, exactly.
Show me where it's illegal to use equine animals.
Now, maybe what we need you to do is create a challenge based around a mule, and we can get you out there.
There we go.
And you're kind of that component, because I love mixing it up with different. And the other thing about this is like the teams, I give them hints, but they don't know what they're getting into until the day of.
Oh, okay.
So that's why it's so important to have like a well-rounded team, is because you kind of you're going to have to make a fire somewhere. You're probably going to have to do some first aid stuff. You're going to have to paddle a canoe. You're going to have to do primitive weapons, but you don't know exactly what's happening. And so you got to be able to switch gears. So anyway, that's something else that a lot of my energy goes into these days. So keep an eye out for that.
That's cool.
I got to say, that's one of the coolest shirts I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah, I got the shirt on right now. Yeah.
Brouhaha,
I appreciate
Bushwhack.
that.
Yeah, I saw when you came in, I was like, I need to figure out where you
Navigation
got
and
that
wood
from.
lore.
My good buddy Robert I work with helped me design the logo.
that's
He's
really cool.
way better at that stuff than me. But at any rate.
Cool. Man, thanks a ton, Rick. Appreciate it. And man,
pleasure's all mine.
We'll find a reason to do this again at some point. But keep the wild places wild, because that's where the bears live.
Thanks, guys.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls. I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.